silence didn't scream, it didn't bang or explode. It was a hollow, suffocating void that swallowed the world in less than a heartbeat. I was standing on my porch in rural Ohio, watching the sun dip behind the tree line, an orange, bruised sky that looked like it was bleeding out. I had a cold beer in my hand, and the radio was playing some old Waylon Jennings tune, low and crackly. Then the music didn't just stop, it evaporated. The hum of the refrigerator inside the house, that constant background noise you never notice until it's gone, vanished. Even the birds seemed to hit a wall of silence. I looked up, and for a split second, the sky didn't look right. There was this shimmering, translucent ripple, like a stone had been dropped into a pond of glass miles above the atmosphere. And then, the transformers at the edge of the county road started to blow, not with a firework pop, but with a deep subterranean thud that shook the soles of my boots.
Blue sparks showered the dry grass like dying stars. Across the valley, the grid of porch lights and street lamps that usually flickered on at dusk just died. Most people probably thought it was a local blackout, a downed tree, or a blown fuse. But I've seen what high-altitude bursts can do. I spent 22 years in the service, half of that preparing for shadows that never came. My gut didn't just tell me, it knew. The tether had snapped. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my smartphone. The screen was a black, dead slab of glass. I pressed the power button. Nothing. I held it. Nothing. It wasn't just out of juice. The delicate silicon heart inside had been cooked by an invisible wave of electromagnetic pressure. I dropped it on the porch floor. The sound of plastic hitting wood felt like the first nail in the coffin of the 21st century. I looked out toward the highway, about a mile off. I could see the silhouettes of modern cars gliding to a halt. Those rolling computers on wheels were dead mid-stroke. Their steering locked, their dashboards dark. People were stepping out, scratching their heads, holding their useless bricks of phones up to the darkening sky, searching for a signal that was never coming back. They didn't know yet that the water pumps had stopped. They didn't know that the grocery store scanners were dead, or that the digital bank accounts they'd spent their lives filling had been wiped into the ether. I didn't wait for the panic to start. I knew the window of polite confusion would only last about an hour. After that, the realization was set in, and after realization comes the hunger. I walked into the garage, my boots echoing on the concrete. The smell of oil, old leather, and gasoline hit me, the smell of the old world. In the center of the bay sat the 1967 Ford, a hunk of American iron, primitive and stubborn. No microchips, no electronic fuel injection, no GPS tracking, just a carburetor and a mechanical soul. I sat in the driver's seat, the springs and the worn leather creaking under my weight. I gripped the thin steering wheel. My heart was thumping against my ribs like a trapped bird. This car was my father's. Then it was a project. Then it was a relic. Now, it was the only life raft in an ocean of dead tech. I pumped the gas pedal twice, feeling the mechanical linkage move. I turned the key. The starter motor groaned, a heavy, metallic sound that felt incredibly loud in the new silence of the world. Come on, girl, don't let me down now. The engine coughed, sputtered, and then roared to life with a violent, beautiful shake. The smell of unburned fuel filled the garage. The headlights, real incandescent bulbs, cast two yellow, defiant beams against the back wall. While the rest of the country was becoming a graveyard of dead sensors, this old beast was breathing. I didn't pack much. My go bag was already in the trunk. I'm a man of habits. A rifle, 2 cases of ammo, a map from 1994, and 5 gallons of treated water. I backed out of the garage, the gravel crunching under the tires. As I turned onto the driveway, I saw my neighbor, Miller, standing at his fence. He was looking at his Tesla like it was a tombstone. He looked at me, his eyes wide and vacant, and he waved, a weak, desperate gesture. I didn't stop. It sounds cold, I know, but I knew where this was going. I saw the orange glow on the horizon, not the sun, but the first fires starting in the city 30 miles away. The grid was dead, the rules were gone, and I had 2,000 miles of empty, lawless highway between me and the only person left in this world I cared about. I shifted into gear, the transmission clunking into place, and pointed the Ford toward the dark heart of a broken America.
Darkness didn't just fall, it conquered. By the time I hit the interstate, the only light in the world came from my own yellow headlamps and the dying embers of distant house fires. The silence of the highway was haunting. Thousands of high-tech marvels, Mercedes, Audis, Teslas, sat abandoned in the middle of the lanes like beached whales. I had to weave the Ford through the gaps, tires crunching over shattered glass and plastic debris. Nobody was driving. They were all walking. I saw families huddled by their dead SUVs, blankets wrapped around their shoulders, staring at me as I rumbled past. Their eyes weren't angry yet, just hollow and confused. They still expected a tow truck to arrive. They still thought the government would flip a switch and bring the internet back. I knew better. I didn't look them in the eye. In a world that just lost its mind, a running car is a target, not a luxury.
10 miles in, I saw the first gas station. It was a chaotic beacon of madness. A crowd of at least 50 people was swarming the pumps, desperately pulling at the handles, not realizing that without electricity, the fuel stayed buried in the tanks below their feet. A man in an expensive suit was screaming at a dead card reader, waving a gold American Express card as if the plastic could intimidate the laws of physics. As the Ford's engine roared into their earshot, the crowd turned as one. The confusion in their faces shifted into something sharper: envy. A group of young men started to move toward the road, their intentions written in the way they gripped their heavy flashlights. I didn't slow down. I shifted into third, letting the engine howl, and felt the heavy iron bumper of the Ford push through the humid night air. I saw them jump back in my rearview mirror, cursing into the dark.
I pulled off the main road an hour later, taking a dirt track into a dense patch of forest. I couldn't risk the open highway at night. Too many desperate souls, too many shadows. I killed the engine, and the silence that rushed in was thick enough to choke on. I sat there in the dark, my hand resting on the cold steel of the rifle in the passenger seat. The smell of the woods was different now. No hum of distant power lines, no drone of planes overhead, just the wind and the crackle of the cooling engine. I looked at the 1994 paper map spread across my lap, tracing the line toward the west. My daughter was in Colorado, 1,600 miles away. In the old world, that was a 3-hour flight or a 2-day drive. Now, it might as well have been on the moon. Every mile would be a gamble, every bridge a potential trap. Around midnight, the sky turned a strange, bruised purple. A secondary pulse, perhaps, or just the atmosphere reacting to the ionized mess above. I watched the horizon flicker with unnatural auroras. I thought about the cities. Millions of people trapped in high-rises with no elevators, no running water, and no way to call for help. The food in the refrigerators was already beginning to spoil. The backup generators in hospitals were likely fried by the same pulse that killed my phone. It's funny how fast the veneer of civilization peels off when the lights go out. We think we're masters of the earth, but we're just hairless apes who learned how to trick rocks into thinking for us. Take away the rocks, and we're right back in the caves. I closed my eyes for a moment, but I didn't sleep. You don't sleep when the world is burning. You just wait for the light. By 4 a.m., the first real scream echoed through the trees. It was far off, likely from the highway, but it carried in the still air. It wasn't a scream of pain. It was a scream of panic. Someone had finally realized that the cavalry wasn't coming. I turned the key, and the Ford woke up with a low, reassuring growl. I checked my fuel gauge, 3/4 of a tank left, plus the 5 gallons in the back. I needed more, but I couldn't use the pumps. I'd have to find a way to siphon it from the dead cars littering the road. As I pulled back onto the dirt track, I saw a figure standing in the middle of the path, a woman holding a small child. She didn't move, she just stood in my headlights, her face a mask of absolute despair. I had to make a choice. The man I used to be wanted to stop. The man I had to become just kept driving.
By the second afternoon, the transition was complete. The confused citizens had officially become predators and prey. I reached the bridge crossing the Ohio River just as the sun began to bake the asphalt into a shimmering haze. It was a bottleneck, a graveyard of dead technology stretching for half a mile. Hundreds of cars were jammed bumper to bumper, abandoned when the grid failed. But it wasn't just a traffic jam anymore. It was a fortress. At the mouth of the bridge, someone had dragged 3 heavy freight trucks across the lanes, creating a wall of rusted steel and scorched tires. On top of the trailers, I saw them, men in hunting camo, holding long rifles. They weren't looking for help. They were looking for tribute. I slowed the Ford to a crawl, the engine thumping like a heavy heart. My grip on the steering wheel was so tight my knuckles turned white. This was the moment I feared, the moment where the road ends and the war begins.
One of the men, a tall guy with a jagged beard and a red cap, jumped down from the truck and stepped into the center of the lane. He raised a hand, signaling me to stop, while the barrel of his bolt-action rifle pointed lazily at my radiator. I stopped 20 feet away, keeping the engine running. The rumble of the V8 felt like a warning, a low growl from a beast that refused to die. The man walked up to the driver's side window, his eyes scanning the interior of the car. He didn't look at my face. He looked at the rifle on the passenger seat and the water jugs in the back. A hungry light flickered in his pupils. "Nice rig, old man," he said, his voice dry and raspy. "Runs smooth, no chips, huh? That's a lot of value you're hauling. The tow just went up. Leave the keys, the gun, and the water, and maybe we let you walk across." I looked at him for a long beat. Behind him, on the bridge, I saw what happened to those who couldn't pay. A dozen people were huddled in the shadows of the dead cars, stripped of their shoes, their coats, their dignity. These weren't neighbors protecting a community. They were scavengers picking at the carcass of a fallen giant. "I'm not walking," I said, my voice steady, sounding more like the sergeant I used to be than the retiree I had become. "And I'm not leaving the car." The man's face hardened, and he began to raise his rifle. "You don't get it, Pops. The world changed yesterday. You're outnumbered and outgunned." I didn't argue. I didn't plead. I knew that in this new world, hesitation is a death sentence. I reached down and shifted the Ford into first gear.
"Hold on tight, girl," I whispered to the dashboard. I slammed my foot onto the gas. The Ford didn't just accelerate, it lunged. The rear tires screamed as they bit into the hot asphalt, sending a cloud of blue smoke into the air. The man in the red cap barely had time to dive out of the way as the heavy iron bumper of the 67 brushed past his hip. I wasn't aiming for the trucks. I was aiming for the gap between a stalled sedan and the bridge railing. The sound was deafening, the screech of tearing metal, the pop of glass, and the violent shudder of the steering wheel as I scraped the side of the Ford against a dead Toyota to squeeze through. A shot rang out, a sharp crack that shattered my rear window, showering the back seat with diamonds of glass. I didn't look back. I just kept the pedal to the floor.
The Ford took the hit like a champion. The heavy frame groaned, but it didn't buckle. I cleared the blockade, the engine screaming at 6,000 RPMs as I raced onto the open span of the bridge. More shots followed, small puffs of dust kicking up from the asphalt behind me, but they were desperate and aimless. As I reached the other side, entering the hills of Kentucky, I checked the mirrors. The bridge was a fading silhouette in a haze of smoke and heat. My hands were shaking, but my mind was cold. I had just crossed a line that can't be uncrossed. I hadn't just defended my life. I had accepted that the man I was, the man who believed in service and protection, was gone. Now there was only the driver, the machine, and the long, dark road ahead. I looked at the bullet hole in the headrest, inches from where my skull had been. Welcome to the new America.
Days blurred into a monotonous rhythm of driving, scavenging, and wary solitude. The gas stations were either looted dry or became dangerous choke points, so I resorted to siphoning. I learned to identify the full tanks in the dead cars by their sag and the glint of light on their caps, a hunter tracking his prey. The Ford, a true workhorse, barely complained, its carburetor a testament to simpler engineering. But the landscape was changing too. The scattered fires in the cities had given way to an eerie quiet in the suburbs, where houses stood silent, doors ajar, as if their occupants had simply vanished. It wasn't just chaos anymore, it was abandonment. The few people I saw were shadows, haggard, desperate, often armed. I avoided them, a ghost in a machine navigating a world haunted by its own past. Each mile west felt heavier, the air thicker with unseen dread.
I was pushing through western Missouri, low on fuel and even lower on sleep. My map showed an old Air Force auxiliary field, long decommissioned, just off the highway. It was a long shot, but sometimes the military leaves behind fuel caches that are too old for modern sensors to detect. I turned off onto a crumbling asphalt road, the Ford bouncing over potholes that looked like craters. The field was overgrown, the runway cracked, and the old barracks buildings were skeletal against the bruised evening sky. But then I saw it, a small, hardened bunker, half buried into a hillside. Its heavy steel door, though rusted, was still locked. This wasn't just an old storage unit. This was built to withstand a lot more than time. A flicker of hope, or perhaps just a desperate need for resources, urged me forward. I spent an hour working on that lock. It was a heavy, industrial beast, but years of military training had taught me patience and the weak points of security. Finally, with a loud metallic clunk, the tumblers gave way. The bunker door groaned open, revealing a passage that smelled of damp concrete and something else, a faint metallic tang, like ozone after a lightning strike. My flashlight cut through the absolute darkness inside. It wasn't a fuel depot. It was a communication outpost. Old-school analog equipment, reel-to-reel tape recorders, massive radio consoles with dozens of dials, and stacks of classified documents in mildewed boxes. My eyes landed on a large, glowing red warning light above a console. It was still lit. It pulsed with a steady, anachronistic rhythm. How? No grid, no power. How was it still drawing power? I carefully navigated through the cramped space, my boots crunching on brittle paper. I found a logbook, thick with handwritten entries, dated from the late 1950s all the way to last week. The last entry was brief. EMP detected. Global outage confirmed. Secondary surge activity. The signal is active. Recommend immediate protocol B7 deployment. God help us. The signal? I flipped through earlier pages, finding diagrams of strange parabolic arrays, notes on atmospheric resonance, and recurring mentions of exotic energy sources triggered by high-altitude detonations. This wasn't just about frying circuits. This was about something else being awakened, something that used the EMP as a trigger. The red light post, casting a demonic glow on the frantic handwriting. I felt a cold dread settle in my bones, far deeper than any fear of bandits on the road.
Then I saw the final entry, scribbled just beneath the last official log. It was different handwriting, hurried and desperate, scrawled with a heavy hand.
It's not just a blackout, it's a call. The pulse didn't destroy the network, it opened it. They're coming. They heard it. The static, it's speaking now. My blood ran cold. I looked at the red light again, now seeing it not as a warning, but as an active beacon. I didn't know who they were or what the static was saying, but the implication was terrifying. The EMP wasn't just an event, it was a prelude. I turned to leave, my mind racing. My mission to find my daughter was now complicated by a revelation that turned the simple act of survival into a desperate race against an unknown, unseen enemy. The rumble of the Ford, usually a comfort, now felt like a desperate, lone heartbeat against a vast, silent, and waiting darkness.
I didn't stay in that bunker a second longer than I had to. I took 3 cans of heavy-grade military lubricant, a handful of flares, and the logbook. I didn't want the answers it held, but I couldn't leave them for whatever was coming next. The drive back to the main road felt different. The silence of the Missouri plains wasn't empty anymore. It felt expectant, like 1,000 invisible eyes were watching the Ford's headlights cut through the dark. I realized then that the EMP was just the sound of the world's front door being kicked in. We were so worried about our bank accounts and our digital memories that we never stopped to ask what happens when the shield we built around the planet suddenly drops. The air felt charged, humming with a frequency that sat right at the edge of my hearing, the static the logbook mentioned. It wasn't just noise, it was a rhythmic, pulsing cadence. I'm writing this, or rather, recording it on an old battery-operated dictaphone I found in a thrift store bin as I sit by a small fire near the Kansas border. The Ford is cooling down behind me, its iron block ticking as it sheds the heat of a 300-mile run. My daughter's picture is taped to the dashboard, the only thing that keeps my foot on the gas. I don't know if she's alive. I don't know if Colorado even exists anymore. But I do know that the things I've seen in the sky over the last 2 nights don't belong to any Air Force I ever served in. They aren't planes. They are shapes that move against the stars, silent and predatory, appearing only when the strange auroras flare up. They are searching for something. Or perhaps they are just mapping the new, dark world we've inherited. To anyone listening to this, if anyone ever does, understand one thing. The grid dying was the easy part. Hunger, thirst, and the cruelty of men are obstacles we faced for 10,000 years. We know how to fight those. But how do you fight a shadow that uses your own atmosphere as a conductor? How do you hide when the very technology you spent decades perfecting has been turned into a homing beacon for something else? I've started seeing the lights in the distance, not in the cities, but in the deep woods. They don't flicker like campfires. They pulse with that same red rhythm I saw in the bunker. It's a call and response, and the Earth is finally answering. We weren't just disconnected. We were exposed. My hands are steady as I check the action on my rifle, but my heart is heavy. I'm a man of the old world, a relic, just like my car. I was trained to fight enemies I could see, enemies with flags and uniforms. Now, the enemy is the silence itself. Tomorrow, I cross into the mountains. The Ford is running lean, and I'm down to my last few gallons of scavenged fuel. I'll keep moving until the wheels fall off or the road ends in a cliffside. If you find this recording, don't go toward the lights. Don't try to find a signal. If your electronics start to hum or vibrate without power, bury them deep. The grid didn't die because of a war. It was cleared away to make room for what's coming next. This is the last entry from Case File 202-Grid. My name is Sergeant Elias Thorne. I'm a father, a soldier, and a survivor. If the stars start to shimmer like water and the static begins to whisper your name, don't look up. Just keep driving. Fuel is more precious than gold, and silence is more valuable than life.
I'm going to find my daughter, or I'm going to die trying, in the ruins of what we used to call home. But I won't go quietly. I've still got 8 cylinders of American iron and a full magazine of lead. That'll have to be enough.